I am no longer a Jane Doe hiding in the files. I'm a woman, I'm a fighter, and I'm a witness, and I'm begging you, please wash your hands.
Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury. She is a member of the House Oversight Committee, and Liz Stein, a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, who was also at today's hearing.
Thank you both so much for being with us. Congresswoman, remind us why it is that we needed to put the spotlight back on Palm Beach, and did you get out of today's hearing what you hoped to receive?
You know, West Palm Beach is literally the scene of the crime, but it's also where Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise all began. And I think one of the main focuses of this hearing, of course, was on the survivors, their stories. And I think it's important to understand that in the decades since Jeffrey Epstein began abusing girls and women, and since they went to both federal, local, and state officials and reported these crimes, not a single congressional hearing has ever been held in West Palm Beach to understand what happened there, why Jeffrey Epstein was never properly prosecuted under federal jurisdiction, and why he was allowed to continue to abuse women and girls, not just in West Palm Beach, but in places like New Mexico, the Virgin Islands, New York, Paris, the UK. And that is because local officials there did not stop him and the feds did not properly prosecute him. So today was about hearing the stories of survivors, the advocates and attorneys who've been on the front lines, and to make sure that we were in the place where the abuse happened. And I'll just say this. I got to Palm Beach early yesterday, and I literally walked the streets. I walked from West Palm Beach across the bridge to Palm Beach itself, where Jeffrey Epstein and the president live. And you can see how power and inequality were at the center of the abuse of these girls, and how they abused the system itself in order to abuse potentially thousands of women.
You know, Liz, today's testimony was very, very powerful on so many levels. And I think as we continue to have this conversation, every moment that they're exposed to, especially with the voices of the survivors, really has a landing impact with the American people. I was struck by the fact that here she is taking this big step to expose herself openly to Americans and to this process and to this system that still does not believe them, still does not believe her. And I was reminded of and would like to play for you, Sky Roberts, brother of Virginia Giuffre's, response to this idea about how the survivors shouldn't have to risk their safety to be believed. Let's take a quick listen.
For years, survivors have been asked the same question: who were the names? The truth is, many survivors stay silent because many of these individuals still hold power, wealth, and influence in our society. Point blank, period. That is dangerous. No survivor should have to risk their own safety just to be believed. But Virginia, she did it anyway. She stood up when others were afraid, told the truth under oath, and faced people she knew were powerful. Today, we lean on her courage once again.
And that connects the dot to Rosa, I think, in so many ways. Today, she also put her name and her face out there. What do you think that says to the American people about how these survivors of Epstein's abuse are claiming back who they are, their value, and really in a one sense, I guess, shaking the American people to pay attention to their stories?
I think that we saw a lot of really impactful testimony today, and I think that the way that the testimony from the survivors was bookended. First, we heard from Maria Farmer, and then we heard from Rosa at the very end, with Danny and Jenna-Lisa and Courtney in between. You know, I think that to hear Rosa's story today is something that no survivor should ever have to deal with. This is someone who intentionally has kept this private for decades of her life. And she's been outed. Her name was exposed over 500 times. And so now she's been thrust into the spotlight. You know, a lot of us who are public facing made the deliberate choice to be public facing, but this was a harm that was perpetrated against her by the Department of Justice in improperly redacting her information from the Epstein files. And so she's been thrust into this position of vulnerability, and it was really wonderful to see her embrace that today and to speak her truth. You started this talking about Sky reading Virginia's testimony. And I think that what we're seeing across the country and even around the world is that courage is contagious. I can't tell you how many of us that now speak out publicly were inspired by Virginia's voice, and now we see others being inspired by our voices. And the reason that these things happen, and the reason that there's so much misunderstanding around what our experience is because we're so afraid to talk about these things. And so now you see survivors coming out and saying, you know what? We need to talk about these things, because the only way that we're going to get to the bottom of these crimes, and the only way that we're going to make a change in society, because, you know, I want people to understand, we're hearing a lot about Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. What we're really talking about is sex trafficking. We're talking about the crime of sex trafficking, and we need to remove the political emotion that is surrounding this case because of the powerful men that are potentially involved, and look at it for what it is. This was a crime that was perpetrated against more than 1,000 of us. And so when you dial back that political emotion and you hear stories like Rosa's and Danny's and Jenna Lisa's and Maria's and Courtney's like we did today, it's hard to ignore the humanity of it. And it really helps the American public understand how nuanced our experiences are, how terrifying, how invasive our experiences have been, and it humanizes it in a way that we really need to start paying more attention to.
Liz, you make such a good point. Let's hear more from Rosa's testimony today. She testified that she should not have received the visa that she received, and she knew that it could be taken away if she stepped out of line. Take a listen.
Looking back at my case now, I did not have documents to obtain that visa. I am 100% sure of that. My agency being able to obtain that visa for me in such a short time, which was less than 6 months, it's a miracle. You try to do that right now, you won't be able to. I want to know how. And it's impossible. Yeah. So I knew that my visa was linked to him, and if he is unpleased, I would be sent back.
Congresswoman, there is a report that Democrats, you all on the committee, have that claims Epstein exploited reliance on visas and other immigration laws to keep survivors in his control. These documents were produced to you by the Epstein estate, and they identified 55 international passports and identification cards belonging to young women from 16 different countries. At least some passports and visas reviewed belong to women known to be Epstein's assistants, a category from which some women have come forward as survivors. Tell me more about this particular piece. It is harrowing.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's very clear that Epstein and his criminal network used a whole slew of different crimes essentially to hold these women in a form of sexual exploitation and bondage. They used intimidation, they used psychological control, they used money, they used control over their legal affairs, control over their housing, and control over their legal status as immigrants here in the United States. And when we say this was a global trafficking ring, we mean literally that Jeffrey Epstein was co-conspirating with people like Jean-Luc Brunel, who was a modeling agent, and potentially others, including a current Trump official who also owned a modeling agency. They were going to foreign countries. They were recruiting women through modeling and other networks, and then essentially taking them in Jeffrey Epstein's private plane to the United States and giving them visas. That is international sex trafficking. And the fact that the federal government never prosecuted and stopped Jeffrey Epstein I think is as much an indictment of the U.S. government and the system that failed these survivors as the exploitation itself.